Thanksgiving dinner had just started when my uncle's voice cut through the clinking of silverware. He leaned back in his chair, smirking at the relatives around the long oak table, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He's still working as a coffee boy." A few people chuckled, but my sister's laugh was the sharpest. She leaned toward me with that teasing smile she saves for when she knows everyone is watching. "Bring me a latte," she said, and the table erupted into another round of quiet laughs. My face stayed calm, but my chest felt tight. I pulled out my phone under the table and tapped twice on the screen. Less than half a minute later, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway. A sharply dressed driver appeared in the dining room doorway, holding out a single black key fob. His voice was steady and professional as he said, "Your car is ready, sir." The golden Ferrari emblem caught the light, and every head at the table turned. My uncle's smile faded instantly as his wine glass tipped in his hand, spilling red across the white linen. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie filled the air as I stood on the front porch of Uncle Robert's mansion. The house was one of those places you could tell had been in a magazine at some point. The lawn was trimmed like it had been cut with scissors, and the massive wooden doors gleamed under a fresh polish. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt and took a breath before ringing the bell. I knew exactly how the night was going to go. It would start with polite small talk and warm greetings. Then, somewhere between the second glass of wine and the pumpkin pie, it would turn into a quiet competition about who was doing better in life. The door swung open to reveal my cousin James, all smiles, wearing a tailored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Nathan," he said, slapping my shoulder, "you made it." He stepped aside to let me in, and I was met with the sight of my family scattered across the living room. My mother, Susan, sat near the fireplace, chatting with Aunt Clara about some charity event. My father, Michael, stood in the corner, nursing a drink, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning the room in that way he did when he was ready to jump in if I got cornered. And then there was Uncle Robert, leaning against the grand piano, laughing at something James had just said. Robert had always been the loudest person in any room. He was the kind of man who believed that if you were not making six figures in a traditional career, you were wasting your life. He was dressed in a dark suit, his gold watch flashing every time he gestured with his hand. Emily, my younger sister by 3 years, was perched on the arm of a sofa. She wore a silver dress that caught the light whenever she moved, her legs crossed and a champagne flute in her hand. Emily and I had a complicated relationship. She loved me, I knew that, but she also had a habit of joining in whenever the rest of the family decided I was an easy target. The teasing had started years ago when I left my corporate job. I had been working at a well-known marketing firm, and to the outside world, it looked like I had everything figured out. But inside, I hated every second of it. I hated waking up dreading the day. I hated the feeling that I was building someone else's dream while mine sat on a shelf collecting dust. So I quit, and I started my own company. It was small at first, just me and a few drivers delivering coffee and pastries for local shops. The idea sounded ridiculous to most people, but I knew it could work. I had studied the gaps in the market and the inefficiencies in delivery services, and I had a plan. For the first year, I barely made enough to get by. I delivered orders myself, answered calls at all hours, and poured every cent I had into keeping the business alive. When I came to family gatherings during those early years, the joke started. "How's the coffee boy business? Do you get free muffins with that job?" It stung, but I told myself it would be worth it one day. My parents believed in me, but they were careful not to defend me too openly at these dinners. They knew it would just make things worse. Now, 5 years later, my company had expanded to serve high-end clients. We handled luxury concierge deliveries, same-day product drops for exclusive boutiques, and even vehicle transportation for VIPs. But none of that mattered to my relatives because they had already decided who I was. To them, I was still the coffee boy. As I walked into the dining room, the table was already set. Candles flickered in the center, surrounded by platters of turkey, mashed potatoes, and stuffing. Robert greeted me with a nod, the kind of nod that said he had already decided how this night would go. Emily smiled at me from across the table, but there was that glint in her eyes I recognized. She was waiting for the right moment to make me the punchline. Dinner began with the usual surface-level conversation. Robert bragged about James's promotion at his law firm. Aunt Clara went on about her vacation in Italy. Emily talked about her new apartment in the city. I kept quiet, eating my turkey and listening. I had learned over the years that saying less gave them less to twist into a joke, but Robert was not going to let me get through the night without making a point. He put down his fork and turned toward me, his voice loud enough to hush the table. "So, Nathan," he said with a smirk, still working as a coffee boy. A few chuckles bubbled up from around the table. Emily leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Bring me a latte, would you?" she said, her voice dripping with amusement. The laughter grew, soft but pointed, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. I glanced at my parents. My mother kept her eyes on her plate, and my father took a slow sip of his drink. They hated this as much as I did, but they had long since learned to let it pass. That was when I made my decision. I would not argue with them. I would not list my revenue numbers or my client list. I would let them see the truth in a way they could not ignore. That I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the smooth glass of my phone. My thumb moved quickly, opening the app for my company's private VIP service. I scrolled to my personal request form and entered the one thing that would make the entire room fall silent. A Ferrari delivered to the front door. I hit confirm and looked up, my face calm. Emily smirked at me like she thought she had won. Robert was already turning to James to start another story. I sat back in my chair, knowing that in a few minutes this dinner was going to take a very different turn. The warmth from the turkey and the steady hum of conversation did nothing to ease the knot forming in my stomach. My phone sat hidden in my lap, the confirmation screen glowing softly, the request already in motion. All I had to do now was wait. The tricky part was sitting through the next few minutes without giving anything away. Uncle Robert had moved on to telling a story about how he had once been offered a promotion before he even finished his probation period at his first job. He spoke with the same confidence he always did, his voice carrying across the table, filling every gap in the conversation. Every so often he would glance my way just to make sure I was listening. His stories always came with an unspoken message. This is how you do it, and you are not doing it. Emily chimed in from her seat, laughing at something Robert had said about kids today, wanting the easy way out. She tilted her champagne flute toward me, as if to make sure everyone remembered who the joke was aimed at. My cousin James laughed along, but his eyes darted to me once, as if checking to see how much I could take before snapping back. I kept my expression still, my fork moving steadily from plate to mouth. In my head, I replayed every time I had been called the coffee boy. The first time had been at a Christmas gathering 3 years ago when Robert had looked me up and down and asked if I was still delivering lattes for tips. Back then, I had laughed it off. The second time had been at Emily's birthday when she had introduced me to one of her friends by saying, "This is my brother. He runs a little coffee delivery thing." They had both smiled politely, and I had excused myself to the kitchen. Over time, the jokes had stopped feeling like jokes. They felt like labels I was expected to wear, no matter how much I had grown past them. Tonight was no different. Robert set down his fork and gestured toward me again. "I just do not understand it, Nathan. You are a smart guy. You could be making real money, working in a real career, but instead you are still running around dropping off cappuccinos." His voice had the weight of someone who thought he was giving advice, but the smirk on his face made it clear it was not advice at all. That I felt a familiar urge to defend myself, to point out that my company was pulling in 7 figures annually now, that we had contracts with luxury hotels, and that I had employees making more than most office managers. But I knew what would happen if I said it. Robert would nod politely, pretend to believe me, and the jokes would keep coming. Words were not enough with people who had already decided you were beneath them. Emily leaned in, resting her chin on her palm. "Come on, Nathan. Do you even make enough to pay rent without help from Mom and Dad?" She said it sweetly, like it was just another sibling jab, but the smirk in her eyes was sharper than her words. The table chuckled again. My parents stayed quiet, their forks clinking softly against their plates, refusing to join in but unwilling to create a scene. I chewed my food slowly, my heartbeat steady now. I was no longer thinking about their words. I was thinking about the sound of a high-performance engine pulling into the driveway. I was thinking about the look on Robert's face when he realized he had been mocking someone who could buy and sell his prized sports car collection twice over. The minutes dragged as Robert launched into a second story about his business travels. He talked about staying in luxury hotels, meeting influential people, and sealing deals over expensive dinners. I caught Emily watching me between sips of her drink, like she was waiting to see if I would break and try to prove myself. I did not give her the satisfaction. Under the table, I felt my phone buzz once. The driver was outside. I slid the phone back into my pocket, still keeping my face neutral. Robert was midway through describing some hotel suite in Manhattan when a knock sounded at the front door. It was firm and deliberate, loud enough to cut through his voice. Everyone paused, forks suspended in midair. Aunt Clara glanced toward the hallway. "Is someone expecting a delivery?" she asked. James shrugged and started to rise from his seat, but I held up a hand. "I'll get it," I said, standing up calmly. The white chair scraped softly against the hardwood as I pushed it back. I walked toward the front door, every step measured, my pulse steady. The driver was waiting outside, dressed in a dark suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. In his hand was a single-key fob, sleek and black, with the golden Ferrari emblem gleaming under the porch light. "Mr. Carter," he said in a clear, professional tone, "your car is ready. Would you like it pulled around to the front?" I took the key, nodded, and stepped back inside. The dining room had fallen completely silent, all eyes following me as I walked back to the table. Robert's smirk was gone. Emily's eyebrows were raised, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. I placed a key on the table in front of my plate and sat down. Without a word, Robert's gaze flicked from the key to me, then back again. "That yours?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I met his eyes and said, "Yes, one of them." Emily let out a short laugh, but it was not mocking this time. It was uncertain, curious. The driver's voice carried in from the hallway. "Your Ferrari is parked out front, sir." James shifted in his seat to look toward the window, and I could see the reflection of red paint and polished chrome in the glass. Robert leaned back in his chair, his wine glass tipping slightly in his hand. A streak of red spread across the white tablecloth as the silence settled over the room again. The key sat on the table like a silent challenge, its polished metal catching the candlelight. No one spoke for a moment. Forks rested on plates. Glasses hung halfway to lips, and all eyes seemed to bounce between me, the key, and the front door. My uncle was the first to break the silence, clearing his throat as if the sound could pull the conversation back into his control. "So," he said, forcing a smile, "I guess you rented yourself something fancy for the weekend." His tone was light, but the faint strain in his voice betrayed him. I met his gaze and shook my head. "No, it is mine." I picked up the key and turned it in my hand, letting the gold emblem flash under the light before setting it back down. My words were simple, but they carried a weight the room could not ignore. Robert's forced smile faltered, and Emily leaned back in her chair, studying me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. This was the moment I had planned in my head for years, without even realizing it. All the times they had laughed at me, all the times I had swallowed my pride instead of defending myself, all the quiet dinners where I kept my head down and let their words slide off my back. It had all been leading to this. I had never needed to prove them wrong, but tonight I wanted to, not with speeches, not with spreadsheets or earnings reports, but with something they could see, hear, and touch. The driver's voice echoed faintly from the hallway. "Would you like me to pull the car up to the dining room windows, sir?" The formal address landed in the middle of the table like another card turned over in a high-stakes game. I nodded toward him. "Yes, bring it right to the front." Robert's chair creaked as he leaned back, his wine glass now untouched. "Well, I'll admit I did not expect that," he said, his tone lighter now, but missing its earlier bite. Emily still had that curious expression, the kind of look she gave when she wanted to ask questions, but did not want to give away how much she cared about the answers. James, who had been quietly watching, raised his eyebrows and gave a small nod, as if to say he respected the move, even if he would never say it out loud. The low rumble of the engine reached us before the car came into view. It was not just a sound. It was a statement, the kind of deep, steady growl that demanded attention and announced its presence before it appeared. Heads turned toward the wide dining room windows, just as the nose of the car came into view. The glossy red paint caught the glow from the house lights, the sleek lines gleaming as if the car had just rolled out of a showroom. Emily set her glass down, her voice quieter than usual. "That is yours." It was not teasing now. It was an honest question. I looked at her and simply said, "Yes." She glanced at Robert, then back at me, as if trying to reconcile the brother she had been joking about for years with the man sitting across from her now. The car idled in the driveway, its engine a low purr beneath the stunned quiet of the dining room. I could feel the shift happening in real time. This was no longer a table where I was the subject of a family joke. This was a table where they were recalculating everything they thought they knew about me. I pushed back my chair and stood. "Emily, you asked for a latte. I will be back in 5 minutes." The words were calm, almost casual, but they carried an edge I did not need to explain. I picked up the key and walked toward the front door. The soft tap of my shoes on the hardwood was the only sound in the room. Outside, the cool air hit me, and the scent of autumn leaves mixed with the faint smell of gasoline from the idling engine. The driver opened the door with a small bow, his professionalism unshaken by the scene he had just walked into. I slid into the seat, the leather cool against my back, the dashboard lighting up in a soft glow. My hands rested on the wheel for a moment, feeling the power under my fingertips. Pulling out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of the dining room through the window. Every face was turned toward the car, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and fascination. Robert's mouth was slightly open, his eyes tracking the movement of the Ferrari as it rolled onto the quiet street. I headed toward the coffee shop 2 blocks away, the car gliding effortlessly under the streetlights. The short drive gave me time to breathe, to let the adrenaline settle into something steadier. I had made my point the moment the key hit the table, but following through mattered. This was not just about showing off. It was about delivering exactly what Emily had asked for, but doing it in a way that made her remember this moment for the rest of her life. The shop was quiet, the air inside warm, and filled with the scent of fresh espresso. I ordered a latte to go, the barista glancing once at the car parked just outside, and then back at me with a raised eyebrow. I thanked her, took the drink, and headed back toward the house. The return was slower. I wanted them to hear it before they saw it, to feel that same anticipation I had felt in my seat at the table. As the engine's low growl reached the dining room again, I saw silhouettes shift in the window. I pulled into the driveway and parked directly in front of the entrance. When I stepped inside, latte in hand, conversation stopped again. I set the cup gently in front of Emily, who looked at it like it was a trophy. "Your latte," I said. She took it without speaking, her eyes still fixed on me. Robert cleared his throat again, but this time there was no smirk, no joke. There was only quiet acknowledgement. The moment had tipped. The balance in the room was different now, and everyone felt it. I sat down, placed the key beside my plate, and picked up my fork as if nothing unusual had happened. At Emily's hands cupped the latte as though it were something fragile, her fingers tracing the warm cardboard sleeve. The faint steam curled upward, and her eyes stayed on me longer than I expected. The teasing glint she had carried all evening was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. My uncle shifted in his seat, adjusting his jacket as if that might somehow give him back the control of the room he had lost. His wine glass remained untouched, the dark red stain on the white tablecloth, a silent reminder of the moment everything shifted, that I set my fork down and looked across the table. "You all have called me a coffee boy for years," I said, my voice steady. "That's fine. I never corrected you because I figured it did not matter. But since you keep asking, I will answer tonight. My company started with coffee deliveries. Now we manage logistics for luxury retailers, private clubs, and corporate events in 5 cities. We handle high-value items, personal transport, and exclusive concierge requests. The car outside is not rented, and it is not the only one I own. And yes, Uncle Robert, I pay my own rent. The words landed without any rush. I let each one sit in the air just long enough for them to hear it clearly. Robert looked like he wanted to reply, but found nothing ready on his tongue. James broke the silence, first with a quiet, almost reluctant, "That is impressive." Emily took a small sip of her latte before setting it down. "You really do all that?" she asked. Her tone was no longer mocking, and there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, but this time it was the kind that came with genuine interest. I nodded. I built it because I wanted a life I could control. I wanted to work for myself and prove that I could create something valuable from the ground up. I knew most of you did not think it was possible, but that just made me work harder. I paused for a moment, letting my gaze move around the table. I have been underestimated my whole life. Sometimes that can be a gift. The room stayed quiet, except for the faint hum of the car idling outside. Robert leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Why didn't you ever say any of this before?" His voice was calmer now, the sharpness gone. "Because it would not have mattered," I said. "You already had your opinion, and I did not need to spend my time trying to change it. I was too busy making it real." There was a weight in the silence that followed, but it was not the same kind of silence as before. This one felt like they were finally listening. Even Aunt Clara, who had spent most of the night bragging about her travels, seemed to be taking in what I said. The driver appeared again at the edge of the dining room, standing straight with his hands clasped behind his back. "The vehicle is secured, sir," he said. "Would you like me to keep it at the front for the remainder of the evening?" "Yes," I said. "Leave it there." I wanted them to see it every time they looked out the window, a reminder that the image they had of me was no longer accurate. James leaned back in his chair, glancing toward the glowing shape of the car outside. "You know," he said, "I think that thing is louder than Robert's old Porsche." There was a faint laugh from one side of the table, the tension beginning to shift into something lighter. Robert managed a small smile, though it lacked the smugness it had before. "Looks like I might owe you an apology," he said. "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "Just understand that the path you took is not the only one that works. Success can look different for different people." Emily raised her cup slightly toward me in a small toast. "Well, thanks for the latte. Best delivery you've ever made." This time, the laughter that followed was real, not edged with mockery. The conversation slowly moved on to other topics, but the energy in the room had changed. Robert was quieter, less dominant in the conversation. Emily asked a few more questions about my company, and even James seemed interested in the logistics side of it. My parents exchanged a look that I understood instantly. It was a look of quiet pride, the kind they had given me at moments when they knew I had stood my ground without losing my composure. I finished my dinner while answering questions, explaining how the business had scaled, how the VIP service worked, and why we had expanded into luxury transport. Each answer was calm and matter-of-fact, but inside, I felt the satisfaction of years of hard work finally being recognized, even if only for one evening. When dessert was served, Robert asked, "So, what's next for you?" There was no sarcasm in his voice, only curiosity. "Expansion," I said. 2 more cities by next summer and a few partnerships I can't talk about yet, but they are big." For the first time in a long time, I could feel that my words were not being dismissed before I finished them. I was not the butt of a joke or the subject of a pitying smile. I was part of conversation as an equal. The driver came and once more to confirm the car was ready to be taken back to storage whenever I wished. I told him to leave it out front until I left. When I looked back at the table, I caught Robert's eyes, and there was something new there. It was not just acknowledgement. It was a kind of respect I had never seen from him before. In that moment, I knew the night had changed more than just their opinion of me. It had changed the way I would walk into every future family gathering, that I had stopped letting them define me, and I had shown them that my life was built on my terms. The Ferrari outside was just a symbol. The real victory was taking back the narrative they had written for me and replacing it with one I had built myself. The rest of the evening felt different. The tension that had filled the room when I first walked in was gone, replaced by a quieter, steadier energy. Conversations no longer skirted around me or used me as a punchline. People asked questions and actually listened to my answers. Even Uncle Robert seemed to be making an effort, throwing in a few nods and small comments without the usual undertone of sarcasm. Emily stayed engaged, leaning forward during parts of the conversation and asking about how the business worked, who my clients were, and what a typical day looked like. Her tone was curious now, not playful at my expense. She sipped her latte slowly, clearly enjoying it, and every so often glanced out the window at the Ferrari parked in the driveway, as if to confirm it was still there. My parents were the quietest they had been all night, but their silence was not from discomfort. Damn why Mother's eyes followed me when I spoke, and every now and then she would give the smallest smile. My father seemed relaxed in a way I had not seen at a family dinner in years. There was a pride in his expression that he did not need to voice. Dessert plates were cleared, coffee was served, and the laughter that came now was warmer. The earlier sharpness in Robert's humor had been replaced with something lighter. At one point he even asked, "So when do I get to take that car for a spin?" It was said with a genuine grin, and though part of me wanted to deny him just to make a point, I simply smiled and said, "One day." When the evening began to wind down, I stepped outside to thank the driver and have the Ferrari taken back to storage. He gave a respectful nod and pulled smoothly out of the driveway, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet night. I stood there for a moment, looking back at the house. Warm light poured from the windows, silhouettes moving inside as coats were fetched and goodbyes were exchanged. Walking back in, I felt lighter. I had not gone there tonight, planning to prove anything. I had expected the usual jabs and the same tired conversations. But when the moment came, I took it, and it had shifted the entire dynamic, not because of the car itself, but because it forced them to confront the fact that they had been wrong about me. As guests began to leave, Emily stepped up and hugged me. It was quick but real, her voice quiet when she said, "I guess I owe you a better nickname now." I laughed and told her she could start thinking of one. Uncle Robert shook my hand longer than usual and simply said, "Good work, Nathan." That was all, but coming from him, it carried more weight than an elaborate speech on the drive home. The streets were quiet, and my mind replayed the evening. For years I had told myself that their opinion did not matter, and that was true. I had built my business without their approval, without their help, and in spite of their doubts. But tonight had reminded me that sometimes showing people the truth is not about needing validation. It is about claiming the space you have earned. The lesson I carried from that night was not about revenge or proving a point for the sake of pride. It was about knowing the value of what I had built and refusing to let anyone else define it. Success does not need to be allowed to be real, but when the right moment comes, there's nothing wrong with letting it speak for itself. I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who delivered coffee at dawn, exhausted but determined, wondering if the sacrifices would ever be worth it. That version of me would have smiled at how the story turned out, not because of the material things, but because of the quiet confidence that comes from building something that no one can take away. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The house was dark and still, the kind of calm that makes you realize how much noise you have been carrying in your head. I knew there would be more family dinners, more opportunities for subtle comparisons and quiet judgments. But I also knew that the way they saw me had changed, and no amount of old habits could undo that. The truth is, you do not have to answer every criticism with an explanation. You do not have to defend your choices to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. Sometimes the best answer is to keep building until the results speak louder than the doubts ever could. That Thanksgiving will always stand out to me, not because of the car or the look on Robert's face, but because it marked the moment I stopped being the person they thought I was. I did not win an argument. I did not convince them with logic. I simply lived my truth in a way that could not be ignored. And when I walked into my house that night, I felt the kind of peace that comes from knowing you have nothing left to prove to SO. That was the Thanksgiving I will never forget. The night I stopped letting people define me and started letting my work speak for itself. If you have ever been underestimated, I hope this story reminds you that you do not need anyone's permission to succeed. Build your own path. Trust yourself. And when the time comes, let the results speak louder than the noise around you. Fire, thanks for listening. Sparkling heart if the story moved you. Share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment with the part that hit you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.